All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to a rather fun and interesting and dynamic virtual summit version of BM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh here. I've got the legendary David Linthicum on the line, and we've got Adrian Estala as well, dialing in from the road, from the airport. Got to do it from everywhere. The world is federated these days. And we're going to talk about the journey to agentic AI. And, maybe David, I'll throw it over to you first. I'm going to say a couple quick comments here, but I'm a huge fan of cliches. And as my business partner once said, Dr. Robin Blory always says pithy things. He referred to cliches as the wisdom they couldn't kill. And I was like, whoa, that's a good one. And one of my favorite cliches says, well begun is half done. The point is, if you get off on the right foot, if you have the right plan, if you build the right foundation, everything else is kind of easy. You're already over the hump. But if you're not, if you're behind the eight ball, if you have a poor architecture, if you haven't really thought through where you're going with this AI journey, you're going to be putting out fires until you get fired. Basically, is what's going to happen. And I love, we've talked in this business about federated architectures for like 25, 30 years. But really, in the last 5 to 6 years, I think it's finally starting to come together. It's a combination of technology, of open source, quite frankly, of the understanding that you can't fit everything into a box. You can't fit all of your data into a relational model. So you have to respect the fact that data is everywhere. Well, how do you govern that now? How do you govern the access? How do you deliver the access in a meaningful way? That's the topic of the conversation. But David, I'll throw it over to you first. The federated reality, I think, is finally coming through. And I think that's very good news for analytics in general. What do you think, Dave?
No, I think it is. I mean, ultimately, the ability to gather data where it exists and use it on its terms, and not use it on your terms, but no matter how its physical instance or location, is the only way this stuff is going to be able to work and it's going to be able to scale. And I think that this has been, kind of a trend that started back in the 90s as people realized that, and this is around the AI stuff, integration stuff, we realized that the data was going to be all over the place, heterogeneous, very distributed. And if we're going to use it for any purpose, we're going to have to figure out, how to leverage data federation to make this happen. And it was I looked at it as something, wow, this is great. If we can, but we didn't have technology around that could make it work. So here we are in 2025, we have the capability, we have the technology, we have the ability to leverage these very complex, very distributed, heterogeneous, data sources within an enterprise and use them effectively. And in my world, having real clients who are trying to solve this problem, in many cases, that's the only path you're going to have. And I think that the fact of the matter is now AI is really trying to bring around the importance of data, whether it's agentic or generative, and your ability to access data anytime, anywhere when you need it. Your ability to use it as training data or as well as inference processing is just a mandate. The data has to be accessible, and I think that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, and we'll bring Adrian in here in just a second, but I'll throw it back over to you. When you think about the complexity of the business, well, the simplicity that we wrought with the data warehouse, we had to, because back in the day, you had thin pipes and slow processors, expensive storage. Well, all that has changed. And now, if you really want to represent the mosaic of your business, you need more than just customer data, product data. You need lots of different pieces of information, and that's difficult to cram into a warehouse. So it basically calls for a federated approach, so long as you can govern the access and shift far enough left on the security and governance side that you are enabling the delivery of appropriate data for the appropriate use cases, right?
That's right. I mean, the rule should be never store data in the same data in two different places. And data warehousing broke that rule, and now it's stored in 20 different places in 20 different formats and different ways of doing it. So the ability to kind of look at the data asset as something that can be aggregated is really kind of where the paradigm shift is here. In other words, looking at data from data, and everything in the engineering world was to create new databases around whatever application you had. That's absolutely going to make things much more complex and operationally expensive to run. And I understand why that complexity existed. You just kind of hit the nail on the head, thin pipes, and we couldn't do a lot of the capabilities that we had today. But now that the movement's blasting ahead and running toward AI, and we're trying to look at these various data sources that were made 40 years ago and 40 days ago, that becomes kind of the fact that we have to get creative in terms of how we connect these back-end systems. No replication, no ETL transactions. That stuff is going to get you in trouble. So it's the ability leverage the data where it is, using the structure it is, and you're able to mediate the complexity between the back-end data sources, how many, no matter how many sources you have, into the way in which you want to observe the data, the right business models, into the right set of hygiene. All these sorts of things are possible now. And really, one of the things I'm doing as an architect is running around, telling people you don't have to do things the way you did 15 years ago. And by the way, that's going to cost you 3 times as much. And now that AI is coming around, they're rethinking some of these processes. And they haven't considered data virtualization and federation. And I'm putting it on the radar screen because it's first and foremost. It's the only way we're going to have these AI architectures scale with the utilization of AI data.
Right. And Adrian, I'll bring you into the conversation here. This investment by Citi is a pretty bold statement, it seems to me, and it's very good news because it tells me they understand what you're trying to communicate, which is that this foundation is crucial. If you get that foundation right, you're half done. Then it's just the fun stuff of connecting to different applications or models and testing and experimenting. And you talked about that in our call the other day, the importance of experimentation. But the investment from Citi strikes me as a very, very bold endorsement of what you folks are doing at Starburst, right, Adrian?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, you guys are doing a great job. I was sitting here just enjoying the show. I'm thinking, I forgot that I was on it for a second. A lot to cover there. I think let me kind of give you guys 3 lenses when we think about this journey. Because I think the first lens is kind of where we start, and where we start is certainly with a federated approach. Now, I'm glad you guys have said this. Federation's been around for a long time. It's not really new. I will tell you that we've been pushing this concept of federation for quite some time. I don't know that it was appreciated as much as it is today. And I think what's changing, and so when I think about my first step of the journey is, where do I start? I start with what I have, right? If I'm starting an AI journey, no one has the time. No one wants to put more CapEx in fixing my legacy architecture. I need to put my CapEx on my investments on the AI side. So whatever I've got, right? I miss my opportunity. If I'm still thinking that I can try to centralize all my data, you missed the boat. If I'm still thinking I'm going to migrate my data, you missed the boat. I need to figure out a way to leverage it where it sits today. So my journey starts with what I have in place today. Federation is the only way for that to work. And obviously, there's a lot of different layers to federation and modern federation, how we do that. Sometimes you're going to the source, sometimes you're going to a lake, sometimes you're going to a warehouse. And so you try to bring as much as you can together, whether it's on-prem or the cloud, and you're always optimizing the back end. It doesn't mean you never change it. It means that once you create a federation layer, and if I'm a non-technical person listening to this conversation, when I say federation, I want you to think about it in terms of a business semantic layer. I don't want you to think in terms of warehouses and oracles and SAPs and cloud. I want you to think about data products. I want you to think about something that you understand, walking into a data store, if you will, and very easily understanding everything on the shelf, because it's easy for you to pick off the shelf and read it and understand it. And so when I think about federation, modern federation today really is, first of all, the technology to connect, but most importantly, and I would say the big leap that we've made forward when we start driving federation today is how we organize the data in a semantic layer, that business semantic layer, not built for IT, not built for architects. I always say, I don't even need an architect to do this. I need strong business people in the room to do this. That semantic layer, that's the first part of the journey. The second part of the journey, once I figured out where I start, then is who's in the boat with me, who's on the journey with me. And what I just said a second ago is key, is this journey is with the business, right? We are on an AI journey with business teams. I'm not building one big AI solution in isolation, kind of in an ivory tower, and then handing it to the way we built applications the last 20 years. AI is different, right? What I want to do with AI is I want to sit with business teams. I want to give them the capabilities and the tools. I want to build trust, and I want them to drive the development of those AI solutions. And so the journey is with the business for AI. And so if I can create that business semantic layer on the back end with my federation, now my business teams understand the data better. And as I start to kind of drive forward with AI capabilities, it's not that we wait 6 weeks for something. It's that they're in the room and we try and we fail and we try and we fail. And it's okay to try and fail very quickly as long as we're not taking too much time, right? My project cost for an AI project isn't isn't unaffordable. All of a sudden, I'm like, hey, we're going to meet tomorrow. We're going to, by the way, I'm at the airport because I had a meeting this morning to build an agent, right? We're going to have a workshop in the morning. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about what your agent might look like. We're going to build a data product, and we're going to start thinking how you would automate some of your workflows. We're going to start thinking about how you might interrogate that data product. It makes sense to the business teams because they understand the data. It makes sense to the business teams because they've already gotten all excited with ChatGPT, right? So you've got the motivation that you need to push forward, and there's no fear of experimenting and failing because it's not costing a lot of money. We can trial and error, and then find something that works. And so those two parts of the journey are really, really important. The federation to build a semantic layer, journey number one, and journey number two is bringing the business in very early so that you can build AI solutions together.
Right. And you make a really, really good point there. Maybe David, I'll bring you back in to comment on this. AI really does change everything. And even though these large language models are being, in many cases, misconstrued in terms of their value and how you should use them, nonetheless, it is a just glaring, bright, shiny object that has captured the imagination of boardrooms everywhere and of frontline workers. The whole sort of potpourri of people out there working on the enterprise, they see that stuff. So it's a good opportunity to begin these conversations. But I think Adrian really hit a key point here in that you want to foster experimentation. And so if you get that semantic layer built, the first important part of the journey, then you get to the point where you're talking to the business. That's the fun stuff. And when you realize that you're not incurring tremendous expenses by playing around with these new apps, these new AI widgets, if you will, that's when the business starts talking and people start getting more confident in sharing what they're really trying to accomplish. That's what gets the whole ball rolling in the direction of value to the business from AI, right, David?
Absolutely. And I think this is having a conversation is what they wanted the systems to do since the beginning we started to automate stuff. I seem to having those things out. We always thought it was going to be able to solve our problems, and it does nothing more but automate things in a very rudimentary way. Now, AI has the capability of providing, I've seen this firsthand, of being an innovative differentiator for a company. In other words, you can build the IP of a company around the utilization of AI, but you have to get an understanding, and you also have to understand how we're going to weaponize the data, and the ability to do so in such a way where we're mixing the holistic nature of what an LLM is, the ability to understand, everything out there in the world and have certain purposes, but also the ability to mix it with our tactical data that the business is using. That's where the value really gets multiplied. So in other words, I can build a small language model around our inventory data and get some very good insights into what it is, and start tracking. Inventory planning algorithms are going to be a bit better and more tuned. But the ability to kind of marry that with a large language model suddenly releases the Kraken, because suddenly I have the ability not only to take my information to figure out the tactical use cases of it, and the ability to kind of discern information that's going to be valuable to me, but use it with just a huge amount of applications that we haven't dreamed of, and the ability to kind of have the conversation with the stakeholders in terms of what those can be. How would you like to, have a logistics system that's tied to your inventory control system that will plan logistics management, figure out the best mechanism to ship goods from point A to point B, things like that.
And that's just wild. Adrian, I'll bring you back in. We have a really good comment from one of our attendees who says the main obstacle is that today everyone's an architect, everyone's an analyst and a data scientist, wanting to do the fun stuff as I describe it. And nobody wants to enforce data governance and hygiene, the non-glamorous stuff, which is essential. I mean, from your perspective, that's really involved in building the semantic layer, getting access, of course, through federation, but then building that semantic layer, that's well begun, right? And if you can tackle that, and it is an upfront effort, but if you can tackle that responsibly, then you open the floodgates to all the kinds of interesting things that David's talking about, right, Adrian?
Yeah, spot on. I mean, I think so. Going back to the journey, right? If each of us could say, hey, let's take a time out. Let's imagine what the perfect architecture would look like for your agentic solutions in the future and your AI agents in the near term. And you could imagine, and you would build it in your mind. You got a whiteboard, and you would say, great, how long is it going to take us to get there? And you start to map it out. Well, I got to migrate, governance. I've got governance problems today. I'm going to have even more governance problems tomorrow if I'm managing all these different environments. And so you create a very long path, a very long journey. if you start thinking about, forget that, how long will it take me to build it? And when we say semantic layer, I always want to say business semantic layer. We've built business semantic layers for a long time. What we're doing better today, and I say everyone, I think, as I look across different companies, we're building business-focused semantic layers. Back in my old days as CDO, I had a consulting group come in and spend 2 years to build a big data dictionary that made a lot of sense for architects, cost us a lot of money. We showed it to the business teams, made zero sense to them, added zero value. We put it on a shelf, it looked good. Auditors came in, we showed it to them. We never used it again. This is different. A business semantic layer is something where I can bring the business team in the room and they understand the Legos. They understand them very, very quickly. But going back to governance, the governance teams also understand it. And so instead of trying to apply governance at every table, every field, every row, across all my back-end data sources, I'm not saying stop doing it, but it's hard to do, and somebody might say it's impossible to keep up. I can apply less effort on a handful of data products. So let's say I have 100 data products that are replacing 1,000 copied and duplicate and legacy data assets. And these 100 data products are high quality and they're highly reused. And that's where I have to apply all my governance. It's a game changer for governance teams because I can deliver better governance, better quality, better accountability with a smaller set that more people are going to use. And so I think governance gets much simpler. And you're not just doing governance with a small team, you're sharing the responsibility. You've got IT teams and you've got business teams and you've got governance teams kind of working together to share the balance. Apologize if there's background noise here at the airport, but
yeah, no worries. No, so our first segment is coming to a close here in just a minute, but I'll just kind of recap a couple key points. As Adrian was saying, you want to get that business semantic layer hammered out, and you need the business to be involved in this process. So as you're building out your federated architecture, you're trying to figure out which systems do we want. Let's get access set up to these systems. What are the policies? What are we going to try to understand? That business semantic layer is crucial because guess what? The business wants to focus on business value. So when you speak in their language, when you can speak in their terminology, that's going to get their attention. And to Adrian's point, if you can build products that are foundational components that you then piece together like Legos to create higher value solutions, that's the answer. So now you're not trying to manage 8,000 different tables in a data warehouse or across some data lake environment. You're trying to manage 100 data products, and you've got teams that manage different components in those environments. That's the next generation. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, a very fun virtual summit. We're diving deep into the weeds, trying to understand the journey to agentic AI. It's very exciting stuff. We're still a ways away. I mean, there are some AI agents out there doing cool things. You have to be careful about them, obviously. But I want to throw a really fun use case at you, gentlemen, that I was talking about with my developer friends just yesterday here in Santa Cruz. And David, I'll throw it over to you first. But basically what they said is, we're at the point now with these generative capabilities, and there are a bunch of them out there for app development where you can load a requirements document into this engine and it actually spins out an app that you can then fine tune and touch around. Well, guess what? one of the conversations we had yesterday was, it's so sophisticated now that you can be recording your conversations as you're talking to the business. And it's just like Otter grabs notes and Read AI grabs notes and Gong is grabbing sentiment and all these things. You're keeping track of the requirements gathering process in the moment, to where at the end of the conversation, well, that conversation with the business is the conversation you want to use to define the semantics, the flow, the objectives, what you're trying to accomplish. You don't have to worry about taking all these notes anymore. The documentation is done for you by the tool. And then by the end of the conversation, you can hit a button and it'll show you the new app. That kind of time to value, that kind of iterative ability to discuss something and build it while you're talking about it, to me, that is just massively game changing, and it gets everybody invested. Because I think one of the big holdups with doing new apps and new functionality for the business is that it takes so long from idea to production. And that's just not the case anymore now, especially if you have this good foundation, this business semantic layer Adrian's talking about. You can have these conversations with the business and spin up the apps while you're talking to them and then show them by the end of the conversation. But David, what do you think about that?
No, I've seen some proof points of that, and it's amazing technology. I mean, continuous development, continuous improvement, the ability to have a conversation with a developer in terms of what your vision is, what you want this application to do, and every executive has that conversation with you, and it's very tough. It's very tough to capture the requirements and figure out how you're going to map it in technology. But now we have the capability of grabbing this stuff in real time and then putting it into the DevOps pipeline, and the ability to spit out code and spit out systems and spit out testing scenarios and spit out governance policies and spit out security policies as well. That's going to be part of this thing. And there's this iterative loop where we're just discussing the improvements of the system. We're thinking about how we're going to make them better. And the ability to capture that in real time is something we couldn't do very well over the last 20 years, even with chat ops and some of the other things that are there. So the tools are starting to emerge, and they're real. And I think people are going to be able to take advantage of these, and even to be able to define data, the ability to define utilization of data, the quality of data, even the ability to define the abstraction layers and how you're dealing with the semantic layer of the information.
Right. Yeah, all these component parts are coming together. Adrian, I'll throw it over to you. When you get that kind of rhythm rolling with the business, that's when you start really hearing what they need, what the problems are, what the vision is, what the goals are, and to have that real fluid process, I think just greases the tracks to business value. What do you think, Adrian?
Yeah, and that's the most exciting part. I think career IT, as career IT people, we got used for a long time to we're the ones in charge of building, we're the ones in charge of managing requirements, we're the ones in charge of delivering and managing change over a long time. And that takes, I used to manage 10,000 applications at one point in my life. Application lifecycle is complex, and it's expensive. In an AI world, when we sit down with the business team and we ideate on that first agent, something simple. Sometimes we as engineers, we're trying to overthink it. I want to build in this fully autonomous agent that's going to do everything. That comes with time. Usually you start with a very simple chatbot, right? You build it very quickly. You build it in a day. And the business teams are fascinated because they're able to interrogate their data, which maybe they used to take them a long time, and maybe it was Excel, and maybe it was 7 hops, and now we're interrogating data, step one. And then they start saying, hold on a second, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? I do the same activity. Every time I see this, I have to go through the sequence to create a profile or create a calculation. Well, you know what? Stop doing it manually. Let me just do that autonomously. So you start to automate certain things. And then they say, hold on a second, here on the business side, we have this workflow. Could we just, yeah, absolutely. And so you move from interrogating data to automating tasks, to automating workflows. And when the business is doing that with you and they understand it, one, they trust it. Two, they're driving it because they're part of the game. But more importantly, their ideas are so much better than our ideas. And so our job is really just to create the platform and the capabilities. I like to create templates for agents. I like to create templates for the data products. We can build them in the right way. We can build them fast. But if you can just get them going in the right framework, and the key to that framework is that it's got to be approved by the governance team. How many projects or AI projects are stuck at companies because of the AI governance board? There's a long list, there's a backlog. And they're usually stuck with data, right? They got to get, where are you getting the data? What are you doing the data? What LLM are you using? When you have a framework where you've got certified data already, and you've got a framework where you can manage the LLM you're going to connect to already, and you have a framework that has built-in controls to the agent templates, now all you got to do is invent. And that's when we go back to experimentation, that's when the magic really happens. You get the business teams to invent with their business eyes, so to speak, and their business brains, and that's a much bigger impact.
Yeah, well, and you can learn. I'll throw it up back over to David. This experimentation side is, I think, is very, very exciting. And again, if you have that good foundation, then you have the freedom. I remember years ago in my college days, I wrote my thesis in philosophy on deconstruction, and I thought it was a very, very interesting concept that you would sort of break down the structures in your mind for how you interpret things, and it helps you keep an open mind and really think through things. And that got me thinking about all kinds of possibilities. And that's where you want to be as an enabler, as the person who's responsible for delivering the data foundation. You want this federated architecture for many different reasons, one of which is because things change. If you think about the old mindset of building out these relational tables, data warehousing is not going to go away. It's still going to be a sort of deterministic system that feeds into some of these other apps. But the world is very unwieldy, especially these days. And you need to be able to adapt and adjust to market conditions, to pricing conditions, to things like tariffs, government policies, regulations. All these things are just, I mean, death to the old static view of the world. But if you have more of a flexible environment, and that's what this federated architecture enables, especially if you focus on data products, that's going to enable you to address things, enable you to think outside the box, and then experiment quickly and learn from the experiments. Because it used to be you had a theory and it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks to prove out whether or not you had the right idea. That's too long. We need to figure that out in a day, in 2 days, in a week. And that's what this architecture enables, right, David?
Absolutely. You think about the key benefit here is that we're able to put volatility into a domain. And that's something we really couldn't do, a lot in the past. And the ability to make that domain easy to configure and easily changeable. And you think about it, when you get into federated information and your ability to, drive, federated data, the ability to modulate that data and alter that data, if you're going to do that in a layer of abstraction, and it's not necessarily going to bother the back-end physical system, that's going to be a huge advantage. And so if you look at companies that are going to be agile and your ability to kind of keep up with the, keep up with the competitors and things like that, your ability to change and add to market conditions, your ability to experiment and try new things, that needs to be something that is put in the framework. Now, that was the objective of service-oriented architecture years ago, the ability to leverage service and have a configurable system. We never got there. Now we have the opportunity to do it today. And the thing is, data is key. I view data as more important than many of the behavioral services that many of these enterprises are implementing. And so if we put it into a way where we can configure the back-end semantics to meet the exact needs of the business, then we got something, because we could change on a dime. We can change the use of data, the meaning of data, how it's represented in different areas, abstractions of data, aggregation of the data. All that stuff can be done without bothering the back-end systems. I mean, how powerful is that, Eric?
Wow, that's such a good point. And you want that free play. Actually, that's where I was going with the deconstruction concept. I remember Jacques Derrida wrote this paper, and he basically said you have structure and free play. And his point, Adrian, I'll throw it over to you, is that structure allows you, it's almost like the kaleidoscope, it allows you to see things in a certain way. But if you can change that structure, then you can see things in a different way. And that's the free play he's talking about. And David is kind of hinting at that right now, that you want that experimentation. That's the free play. That's the openness to play around. Now, once you find something that works, here's something I've noticed with these LLMs. They're good at giving you a framework and a general idea, but you don't want to put that into production. You have to be very careful about putting these unwieldy systems into production. So you get the design, you get the template by using the AI, and then you go out and you sort of hard code a data pipeline or something to build that and make it durable. But the free play is what gets you there. The experimentation is what gets you to the idea, the aha moment, and that's crucial for success, right, Adrian?
Yeah, that was brilliant, by the way, David. I need a famous quote there. We'll probably retitle the whole session around. But spot on, Eric. I think the other thing to think about when we think about the semantic layer, because there are so many elements here that I just want, not enough time to whiteboard. I wish I had a whiteboard. Adrian without a whiteboard is like a teacher without an eraser or a chalkboard. But people need to understand when we think about the semantic layer, it's great. I can build a semantic layer very quickly with the right business team in the room. I can write queries to pull the data into the semantic layer very quickly with the right teams. You get there fast. You get there in 90 days or so, depending on how complex the environment is. But here's the but, right? The most important part there is the business metadata. The reason why I need the business teams is because they need to describe to me what the tables are. They need to describe to me what the columns are. I need it in their language. It doesn't work without that. When I say it doesn't work, when I put an AI agent in front of it, and if somebody's asking English business questions on the agent side, it won't translate if I don't have business metadata on the data product side. And so none of this works without business metadata. And once you start to get very good, rich business metadata across data products, now I can start to really build really good knowledge graphs or digital ontology across, not knowledge graphs that build relationships from technical metadata, but knowledge graphs that build relationships from business metadata. That's the whole key. That's key number one. The other piece is in what I call business RBAC. And so as a CDO, I know when I looked at all my access models, so all the old systems that I used to have, we didn't build access 20 years ago or even 10 years ago for data. We built access for applications and systems and workflows. And so when I look at how we want to access data today, data as a product, the old legacy access models don't work anymore. And what I don't want to do is when I enable a business team to access this new business semantic layer, because I've seen this happen. I don't want them to wait 12 months or 6 months even fighting through access. Hey, it's a beautiful data product, but my user account only allows me to see one column, or I can only see half of it, right? And so it's important as we build the data products to also build a modern business RBAC model that's based on real business personas that understands every data product as an aggregated risk profile. It's just a much better way to look at it. And when you write access models and you have the right business metadata, going back to how we're able to move so fast with agents, it makes the whole front end so much quicker.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And David, I'll throw it back over to you. I love first of all, I love that we're talking about data products now. I think that has really represents a movement forward in the industry, because who really cares about the plumbing? I mean, someone has to know the plumbing, the governance people, the security people, they have to know that. But it's like your car. You don't have to know every part of your car, how the engine works. You just drive the car. And that's kind of where you want to get with data products. And to Adrian's point, again, if you have that business semantic layer, if you're speaking in terms of the business, then your natural language processing is going to work really, really well, because it's going to be able to align to the columns and the fields in the systems that the business people are concerned about. And it gets you that level of personalization and granularity that are required, right? It's like, I think about consumer press versus trade press. Consumer press, it's very high level, very broad. That's okay for just entertaining yourself, but trade press has to be deep. And these data products, they're like trade press. They have to go deep. They have to have a certain granularity to have any value to the business at all. And that is something that only comes from getting the right access to the right data that's governed in the right product. And that happens when you get the business working with the data teams. And that's where we are today, right, David?
Yeah, we are. I mean, at the end of the day, businesses didn't work well with the data teams because the data teams were, in essence, data geeks, and that's what they did. And so they talk different languages. And I've been mediating those conversations for 30 years. And so business didn't really know how to leverage the data in ways that are going to be valuable to itself. And so ultimately, they lost track of it, and their expectations went way down. And now we have the opportunity to come back at them and use some more flexible products that are able to align data to the needs of the executives and the stakeholders that are in the loop on this stuff. And now, as you know, one of my clients told me, they have re-expectations that are set up. They're able to leverage this technology as something very different than they could 10 years ago. Finally, they can see the value in it, where they couldn't see it 10 years ago. They had to talk to people, and it would, 30 days to a year to get something done. And there was just too much latency. And I think everybody just kind of gave up on it. Now they're reevaluating those relationships and they like each other.
That's pretty funny. I think that's very, very true. I mean, mindset is one of the hardest things to change. And we'll talk about this in the next segment, folks. And for our virtual studio audience, we have some great questions coming in. Thank you for doing that. Feel free to send us some more of those questions as we go along. But the key is really changing the minds of the business. And that's where these LLMs have, I think, struck gold, because they're so powerful and they're so compelling that everyone is finally paying attention. And to Adrian and David's points, we're able to really get somewhere quickly now. And that's how you get traction. That's how you get trust. That's how you build a better future for your business. Well, don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, fascinating conversation with David Linthicum and Adrian Estala. Adrian is with Starburst, and we're talking about data products, the journey to agentic AI. And in the break there, Adrian, you made a really good point that and this is an interesting dynamic, because I remember it was like 10 years ago, the New York Times said the sexiest job in the world is the data scientist. And I'm like, well, science is actually kind of boring if you get down to it, because it's very detail oriented. You're on the white coats and just very serious people. And now the LM's kind of changed all that. But to your point, you still want the data scientist in the room to know which kind of machine learning model to build, what's going to be appropriate, what's going to likely succeed. And that requires nuance. It requires a deep understanding of math too. That's the other side of the equation. A real data scientist understands math. And if you have that deep understanding of mathematical concepts, things like, what does my one buddy keep talking about? Analytic tomographs, for example. If you got that person in the room, they can really save a lot of time and effort and get you on the right path and help you avoid losing time. Right, Adrian? Go ahead.
I love it. LLMs made the engineer sexy. I'm gonna tell my wife that, see if she believes me. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sometimes when we talk about the semantic layer, we talk about the journey, we talk about patterns and agents. Um, I talk that way because I want to make it very simple for my business customers to understand it. I don't want them to be afraid. I want them to be bold. I want them to feel like they can go do it. At the same time, just as you described, as simple as I'm making it for them, we also want to keep our eyes out for when we need to bring more serious scientists in, so to speak, right? And so where I might need to build a machine learning model, where I need to tweak a machine learning model, where I need to do something different that maybe is outside the norm of what a business person can do. And so we're not, as simple as I make it, I'm not trying to oversimplify it. The way that the business teams should see this agentic workflow, and most people understand basic logic. You say, I've got an agent, and your agent is going to leverage other agents. And that agent over there, it's going to do this thing called RAG. And you know what? You don't even have to worry about it, right? It's going to embed some data, and it's going to make it very easy for you to search documents. And so when your agent needs to do that, it's just going to call that agent. Okay, that makes sense. That's a tool. When your agent needs to run cosine similarity, they may not know what the heck that is. When your agent needs to do some clustering and pattern matching, it's going to call that agent over there, and that's going to help it do it. And so your agent doesn't need to, you don't have to figure out how to do all this inside your box. Your box is really focused on your business process, your workflow. When we need to bring in additional, more complicated capabilities in, we'll call separate agents to do it. And the people managing those agents are experts. They're the data scientists. And so in an agentic workflow, we can kind of create these modular capabilities that we can leverage across the organization and bring the expertise on the business side to their agents and bring the expertise on the data science side to their agents, and it's all connected via an agentic workflow.
Wow. Hey, David, I'll bring you back in on this. This gets very, very, very interesting because you again have to kind of think in a new way to recognize that you don't have to do the long, hard slog anymore. You've got these agents that can go out and do the sort of mini tasks that were required to prepare you to do some analysis. You don't have to do all that stuff anymore. Let the agents do what they do well. And by and large, what I've heard is that you want the agents to be very focused, to have a specific set of tasks that they understand and they do well. And you kind of bring them in. You even see this with like the orchestrator on top and then multiple different agents underneath. We're at the beginning of this journey, to be sure. We're at the beginning. Doing this at any sort of scale is going to be pretty risky. So, kind of get started with it and learn some lessons. But to Adrian's point, you still want the experts monitoring their view of the world, monitoring the agent behavior, shutting down agents that go awry. I've heard you don't want to let them work more than 7.5 hours, apparently. So they're just like people. They learn from us, like, oh, you can't work too long. But it is a dramatic change in the workflow itself, and one that should be very positive for the human, because humans want to do interesting stuff. Humans don't want to do tedious, boring things that put your mind to sleep. You want your mind alive. And that's why you want to really focus on building out these agentic workflows, right, David?
Absolutely. It's compartmentalization of intelligence and the ability to break it apart into functional separate agents that are able to carry out particular tasks. And the thing is, we've been trying to do that for years. And just kind of didn't get to the architecture in terms of how it was going to be able to do. And we didn't have the technology to do it as well. Now we do, and we have the ability to give these agents particular tasks, particular functions, particular goals and objectives that they're able to carry things out. And we can bring the agents in to work on the stuff that we need to have them work on, and have these agents coordinate together, in essence, assemble a team as needed. So in other words, we can have a group of hundreds of agents that do specific things, and we're able to use one agent to assemble the task and coordinated their work and activities. And that's much easier than building this big honking monolithic AI system. And I think that's going to be a much more fine-grained way to use it, and also the ability to use more low-powered computing platforms, things like that. But the thing is, the federation of data and utilization of the stuff is going to be the game changer, because usually agents, since they're running all over the place, the ability to kind of get at the data they need when they need it, to make the decisions when they need it, is kind of everything to them. And I think that's going to be, I think the core game changer in taking this stuff to the next level.
Yeah, and Adrian, I'll throw it back over to you to comment on that last point, which is, we've designed service levels for groups of people from the IT department to the business, for example, or from the software vendor to the IT team. These are the typical service levels. But now we're not just serving information to people who want it. We're serving little tiny bits of information to these agents that need it in a very particular time frame. That's a much different landscape in terms of how systems are being impacted, how system calls are going in to pull this, to pull that. It's a different architecture, and you need to have a much more open mind about how to do that. And I'm pretty sure that a federated strategy is going to be much better than a traditional monolithic ETL data pipeline kind of mindset, because those pipelines break all the time. And if your engineers are just constantly fixing pipelines, guess what? They're probably going to quit and go somewhere else. But what do you think about that agentic value of a federated architecture for data delivery?
We could spend another hour on that topic alone, because I think, well, let me not spend an hour. I think I got like 5 minutes, right? So what you said, David, is spot on, right? So if we think about one basic agent, taking a data product or a set of data products, the value of that story is that from an AI governance perspective, I can be very, very specific about what I've exposed to the agent. The agent can only see this. That's all it can see. That's all it's ever going to see. The accuracy of the way that I talk to the data, the performance is all much higher because I've got a clean, clear schema. I know exactly what's in the box. If I expand that then to two agents sharing data, okay, so I've got one data product supporting two agents, easy enough. How are agents going to share data? How is one agent in a sequential fashion, an autonomous agent that wants to take data, learn from it, make a decision, and maybe change the data, maybe create another data product? How does it then talk to another agent and say, hey, by the way, I want you to do this with this data? So it shares maybe a link to the data product. That would be ideal. If it's writing to a warehouse somewhere, and then that other agent has to go back and read from a warehouse and write to a warehouse, that's going to cost a lot more money, and you don't have the time. The LLM's making decisions at a sub-second, and if you're going back to your warehouse, or if you're going back to some other source somewhere along the way, that's going to take seconds. All of a sudden, every time you want your autonomous agent to do something, it's going to take way too long. And so you want to be able to access data, change data, share data, kind of at the speed of light, so to speak, or at the same speed that the LLM is functioning. I'm not saying that all happens super, super fast, but you want that to happen as fast as possible, and you don't want every transaction to cost a lot of money, because all of a sudden your agentic workload gets very, very expensive. So you got to manage the cost of communication. You also have to manage the performance of that communication. There's a balance there. If you do that with data products, frankly, I don't know how else you would do it. This is the only way that I can think you should do it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I'll tease something up for the podcast bonus segment here coming up in about a minute and a half or so. We are in such a tumultuous, disruptive time right now with these technologies. And I think what we're going to see is that a lot of the old sort of tried and true processes, this rote process of ETL batch windows into the warehouse every night. If you're only using 10% of the data that's in that warehouse, which is usually the case, you're going to see more and more effort to sort of trim down those costs. And you even hear folks like Ali Ghodsi of Databricks talking about this, talking about only pay for what you use, only pay for your compute. I think that's going to be a real driving force in the near term to take a hard look at this entire information landscape, all the things we've been doing, all the reports that are being generated, all the dashboards that are being maintained, not knowing which ones are really being used. That's not going to pass anymore. You're going to have much more ad hoc style dashboards, queries. I mean, when the engine can just spin up a dashboard on demand, you don't need a team to prepare that for everyone every single week. And you even see this in software companies. I was talking to one of my buddies out here. He's like, these enterprise software companies, they have whole teams that build all these data products out, and they go and they show, oh, this is all the clickstream data, this is all this is all that. Does anyone do anything with all that information? Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And that is going to be a changing dynamic going forward. I think a lot of the sort of just ongoing reporting and dashboards that are being done are going to start fading away. They're going to get a lot more agentic workflows, a lot more dynamic ad hoc type materials delivered, because you don't have to do all that work leading up to it anymore. But folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up next. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment with David Linthicum and Adrian Estala. And David, I'll throw it over to you. But there is a ton of investment going on, and there was also this argument that, oh, AI is going to kill SaaS, software as a service. And then someone was saying, yeah, but SaaS is where all the AI is happening. So are you sure about that? But tell us your thoughts about the marketing investments in the cloud.
Yeah, the cloud providers are making a tremendous investment in this stuff. Now, I just went to the AWS Summit in New York City this week, and they're $100 million, just into, getting the initial innovation of this stuff off the ground. And so that's something you got to pay attention to. Microsoft and Google and some of the other, major hyperscalers are making similar investments. What that is driving interest into the enterprises and trying to finally figure out what this technology can do. And they figure if the cloud providers are moving that way, they're also going to move that way as well. And also the cloud providers are setting up the easy buttons for, building much of these agentic based systems. They're not there yet, but I think that's coming. That being the case, the data problem becomes exponentially, more of an issue because, I think that when you get into cloud environments and you have a walled garden, that's not necessarily the way to deploy it. Your ability to federate it in a multi-cloud architecture, your ability to federate information that's all over the place, and your ability to make sense of complex and heterogeneous backend systems and use them in an agentic framework is the problem to solve. And so what's going to happen is the cloud providers are throwing gas on the fire right now in terms of the marketing hype. They're going, enterprises are moving in that direction because there's so many marketing dollars that are influencing them to make that happen. They're going to have to rethink how they deal with the data. That's the biggest latency aspect of it. And I don't think the cloud providers have the magic buttons, to look at that. You're going to have to deal with technology like federated database, data access technology to make sense of this all. And so I think that technology becomes exponentially more important as the cloud providers, push the market forward.
Wow, those are excellent points. Adrian, I'll throw it over to you. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think what I find really interesting right now, so we have a number. Most companies are hybrid, right? You've got some in the cloud, you've got some on-prem. There are fewer, but certainly still companies out there that are completely on-prem. Very few companies that are completely in the cloud, and so everybody's dealing with, for the most part, a hybrid environment. What I find really interesting, David and Eric, is that the LLM solution, where you put the GPU and where the LLM sits, is interesting. Now you want to be able, so nobody wants to go build a GPU farm. It's expensive. Getting the GPUs is hard enough, and so infrastructure-wise, you'd be like, let me go build that somewhere where it's scalable. But from a privacy perspective, I'm hearing from a lot of different organizations the nervousness about, for certain sets of data, it's like, hold on a second, I don't want to expose this to a public element. Well, it's not really public. It's like, is it? And so there's a lot of risk and concern. And so you sit down with the governance board, try to get them comfortable with somebody using a cloud-based LLM, which a lot of these SaaS providers are using. And I'm saying there's a place for them for sure, but there's data sets where you're like, I'm not sure I'm ready to expose these data sets, which oftentimes are where you want to have your best analytics into the cloud. And so I think that's really interesting how we're, in some cases, we're having to pull cloud data down to analyze it in a local farm. In other cases, we want to use the cloud, but I don't know how that's going to work out, but it's a really interesting challenge right now that we have to kind of work through, at least until we get more comfortable with cloud-based LLMs and really understanding what the exposure there is. The other kind of part to that story is, from a scalability perspective, I'm not really sure that we're clear on exactly what we're trying to scale. I had this conversation yesterday. It seems like a really simple question, but like, what are we scaling here? Am I scaling the UI? And it's like, well, yeah. Am I scaling the LLM? Well, yeah. You talked about an orchestrator earlier. There's a concept of a supervisor agent and a coordinator agent. So from a scalability perspective, I think we have to rethink what that means, right? Because now, if I can modularize and I can start to reuse some of these core elements, how do I distribute? Who creates the plan? And so from a scalability perspective, I think that's the other question. It's a different kind of scalability. We're used to scaling in the cloud. We're used to scaling infrastructure. But now how do we scale insight? How do we scale agents? How do we scale decisions, so to speak? And that's a whole other new thing I think that we're thinking about. And that affects the cloud as well, because I might decide in a supervisor agent or an orchestrator that I might want to leverage this resource for cost and not the cloud, or vice versa. And so the decision to scale oftentimes it might drive whether I go to the cloud or where I stay on-prem. It might be privacy, it might be user experience, it might be the LLM itself, where I trust an LLM with certain type of data more because it's better on finance data, and maybe Mistral's better on something else. And so there's a lot of different things to consider there from a scalability perspective, things we haven't yet considered that are kind of brand new concepts around this orchestration agent.
Right. No, these are all good points. And, I think that we'll close out here by focusing on the basics. And David mentioned this a couple times throughout the length of the call here. that the data is the most important part. So we say this all the time in these shows, get your data house in order. You really need to understand what the landscape looks like, what is your valuable data, what's your trusted data, what's your certified data. That's where the data warehouse will come in for sure. But you want to button down those processes and really understand the governance. And that's why I think this federated architecture is good for lots and lots of different reasons. And if you think about a representation of a federated architecture, it's a graph. It's basically a graph. And the more you start thinking in terms of graphs, the more you realize how valuable they are for achieving agility, because you can always add nodes to a graph. You can always reroute things. You can kind of change how your view of the world looks. Maybe the world didn't change, but your view of the world has changed, and that changes your priorities and how you want to feed your data products. And I think that you need to focus on agility as much as possible. And I'll just let maybe David close us out here. Experimentation is key, but buttoning down that data architecture, you really want to understand what's out there before you just start pointing algorithms at it, right, David?
It's everything, Eric. And I think that's the fundamental mistake that people don't understand when they're trying to cross into the AI chasm, the importance of the back-end system, the importance of the data being in good hygienic state, the ability to eliminate some of the redundancy out there. The use of your AI systems and the value of your AI systems is going to be completely dependent on the quality of the information you have. And so people need to make those links and go back there and understand, if we're going to access these back-end systems, how are we going to do it? So are we going to use an abstraction layer, which is going to provide you flexibility? That seems to be a mechanism I think people are going to choose.
Yeah. Well, look these gentlemen up online, David Linthicum and Adrian Estala. He's with Starburst, starburst.io. Very cool technology. They've been around for a while now. They're really building out. And that investment from Citi is an excellent vote of confidence. Citi obviously understands, and that's a heavily regulated industry. So they know what happens when they make mistakes on the data side. So they're going to make sure to button it down and get it right. Well, folks, send me an email if you want to be in the show, info@dmradio.biz. We'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to DM Radio.
Thank you, Eric.